Up next, we look at baseball's current and future application of AI. Our panelists today are Chris Bitetto, Manager, Replay Administration and Data at Major League Baseball, Joe Rosales, Director of Baseball Analytics at Sports Info Solutions, and Amod, who is Machine Learning Engineer at Gemini Sports Analytics. Our moderator is Brian Hall, founder of AlphaPlay, who will moderate from the table.
Thank you, everyone. So I think what's really interesting is that a lot of you realize that artificial intelligence is already part of baseball, right? It's already arrived. There's a lot of hype now with ChatGPT. We'll talk about that at the end, kind of this generative AI. But I think what we should start with is kind of understanding even what artificial intelligence is, right? It's a term that gets thrown around a lot. Some things called artificial intelligence, which we'll talk about during this panel, aren't actually artificial intelligence. So just a question for the panel, like how would you kind of define artificial intelligence?
Right, so I can answer that. So I think it's like a broad term, artificial intelligence in itself. And how I kind of think of it is simulating a human intelligence and trying to solve problems that we humans do in our day-to-day lives with the help of technology, let's say. And then like obviously it's like a broad term and there are various aspects of it. You can divide it under a large umbrella. So there's obviously the machine learning side of things. There is robotics, there is computer vision that goes into it, natural language processing, and there are so many applications of AI that can work in sports. Like it's quite amazing to see.
I have a question for the audience, and that would be if you could raise your hand if you've used an artificial intelligence model on baseball data. It's a good percentage of the audience, right? So I think what we can think of is like artificial intelligence as something that can enhance what humans can do as opposed to necessarily replace them, right? As you know, you use these models to essentially do things that the human mind couldn't do. Detect things that you couldn't see otherwise. And hopefully it's useful to people. I thought it would also be interesting if we kind of talked about the current state of technology, like what is MLB using today? Because actually there's a lot of interesting parts of this process that we as fans might not even realize, even though we watch games all the time. So Chris, from your perspective, like kind of as part of replay at MLB in Manhattan, could you kind of explain a little bit about the technology that's currently being used when it comes to determining the calls in the game?
Yeah, so on a daily basis, we have, roughly 16 cameras available that we ingest, that we take in, and a portion of those are high frame rate cameras. So depending on play type, ballpark, there are going to be different cameras available to use to reach different decisions. In the replay center alone, when we have a close play go off, we're going through the review process, regardless of them coming or not. So we're filtering down all of that information in real time and trying to present the best angles available for the replay official, a major league umpire, who, we try to reach an accurate decision in a timely fashion as well. So trying to facilitate all of that in roughly a minute or so and reach a decision, but it's really narrowing down all that information to nail down what is relevant to the play that we have to make a decision on.
And I think essentially what you're using is you're using humans right now, like not artificial intelligence, umpires, right? Yep. Who are, I've heard like to go to Manhattan in the heat of the summer and spend a week, calling things from the booth there. Yep. They rotate through and there's different teams that come in. Could you kind of explain a little bit about like the need like to kind of create a good baseball product when using technology, kind of like how you want to do things quickly and how it doesn't slow down the game, say, compared to other sports?
Absolutely. So one thing that our group in New York, we take pride in is pace of game. And it's been a very focused talking point for a few years now, and replay is a part of that. Obviously, we're stopping the game to correct the decision that was made on the field, and we take pride in being able to reach a decision in that fashion. Last year, we averaged 1 minute and 26 seconds total time of review. If you compare that to other leagues, at least from my perspective, I think we do a really good job of not delaying the game, especially in the most crucial part of a game. So I'm a big basketball fan. I watch a lot of NBA, and I hate in those final 2 minutes when it seems like the most crucial possessions are at stake. We might be sitting what seems like a few minutes for an accurate decision to come. But I know, at least from the replay center, my experience in New York, we have a very fine-tuned process that we take pride in, that we try to tweak and fine-tune during the off season, getting ready for opening day in just a few weeks. So really nailing down that process to make sure that you're not hindering the pace of the game at all is it's a huge point of emphasis for us.
So let's talk a little bit about how technological changes are approved by MLB, right? How and let's take the robo-ump, right? There's a lot of press about robo-ump. It's been discussed in the conference earlier. From your perspective, could you kind of explain kind of the process and the deliberation that MLB uses whenever it kind of approves new technologies, whether it be robo-ump or even a new AI system?
Yeah, I think you could look at the approval process for, say, rule changes. We've discussed that a few times, so far during this conference, but there's a process of, getting players on board, getting, clubs and league officials, and obviously umpires are a part of that too, and implementing rules. So there are different checkpoints no matter what that you have to hit. And the process would be no different when it comes to implementing different technologies in the game. And it's not a process that is super quick. It might take a few years to introduce the new topic or technology, and then it obviously has to follow through various checkpoints. And robo umps or automatic ball strike zone is something that we're kind of seeing unfold in real time. It's been in the minor leagues for a couple of years now, and there's a lot of tweaking to those systems as well to make sure that it's as accurate as possible, that when the time comes, if it is implemented, everybody is not questioning, can we trust this technology or not? And that process has to, kind of go through, that process has to be followed no matter what.
Yeah, so even though I think a lot of you out there know there are technologies in artificial intelligence that could be implemented today in baseball, but I think there's almost like a human element, right? We have approval processes. I think the owners have to get in a room and actually, raise their hands and decide by majority vote whether, there's certain changes and technology being adopted, right? So even though it's out there, it's getting people comfortable with this. How do umpires kind of react to these technological changes that might end up I mean, maybe the fan would see aiding them or helping them speed up the game rather than, say, doing it a more old-fashioned way?
I think overall what it comes down to is everybody wants to do their job the right way. And, again, going back to the rule changes, we now see a time where players can no longer slide into second base, with a clean lane to the base. Why? Because fielders are dropping their leg and could lead to player injury. And now the umpires are going to be responsible for calling possible obstruction, and enforcing that rule is going to be key to make sure that everybody's enforcing it in the same manner. And that's what it comes down to. So as long as the technology, whatever's given to them, they just want to make sure that they can implement it across the board uniformly. Everybody's on the same page. And there are no questions throughout the league or by the players where, we have a controversial call of any kind, because it's being ruled consistently throughout the entire league. So same thing with technology. If it's being added, they've taken so much over the last couple of years, whether it's making announcements when it comes to replay reviews, and they're taking everything in stride to, again, there's a transparency that is crucial for fans and anybody viewing the game as well.
And then kind of one last question related to this, which is of the plays that umpires are currently reviewing, and maybe the plays that they don't review because of just pace of game issues, where do you see that potentially AI could be used to kind of help maintain that quick pace in the game and actually like aid an umpire in something that's typically a tougher call for an umpire to make without kind of assistance?
Yeah, I think the immediate ones that come to mind are fair fouls down the line, where you might not have a camera shooting down directly down the line at every ballpark. It might not be a high frame rate camera on top of that, so the image itself might be pixelated. So again, it's filling in gaps of data that's missing that cameras can't provide, and the human eye can't kind of bridge that gap themselves. I think a hit by pitch is another one where it's really difficult to tell, even with a high frame rate camera and a zoomed in frame. Does a ball strike a batter's pinky that may or may not be wrapped around the knob of a bat? And doing that in a timely fashion is sometimes not possible. So if there's technology that, again, there's a process that hopefully the data can be processed and reach a decision in a timely manner. But if we can bridge a gap that we can't, I think, there's got to be a way to embrace that in some capacity. So.
And Joe, I would be interested if you could kind of give us a little background about when you kind of saw from working on your own models at SIS and also with clubs that AI really and machine learning started being kind of a tool that clubs were open to using.
Yeah, sure. So I know that from our experience, like in terms of when we started integrating machine learning in some of the modeling that we did, I mean, honestly, it's hard to pinpoint the exact year, but certainly, so, if most people are familiar with defensive run save, that's, kind of our flagship metric, and something that we've built some machine learning processes into the analysis of calculating out ratios and the likelihood of a ball in play based on its characteristics being turned into an out, and therefore how much credit you're going to give or take away from a player for making or not making a play. And that is something that we started integrating machine learning into. Again, if I'm remembering somewhat correctly, in somewhere around like 2017, I want to say. And I think that's sort of approximately the same time frame where clubs, I remember specifically sort of starting to add to their job postings, looking for analysts, not just with SQL capabilities anymore, but, things that had some advanced statistical analyses and, some experience in machine learning, again, sort of in that, mid teens, 2000 teens type time frame. And and I think from there, that's where a lot of this analysis and use of AI and machine learning has started to really sort of propagate through the industry.
And then now that it's been around for several years and it's used by every club, do you get a sense of if there's some sort of AI divide between the clubs where the haves and the have-not exists, almost like a budget issue with the number of, how strong your players are? Is there something similar going on with the technology?
I mean, honestly, I'll say it's a little tricky to sort of answer that in that, obviously teams are doing a lot of their own proprietary work and therefore want to keep a lot of that stuff sort of close to the vest. And I know that there were, potentially ways in the past where, you could kind of use as a proxy how sophisticated a team was just by the number of people that they had working within their either analytics teams or development teams. And at this point, I think every team has really started, building out those teams or those groups within the team to be large enough that there are still smaller ones relative to larger ones, but even the small ones have a lot of people working on that kind of thing. And I'll say from our interaction with teams as the years have gone on, where in some of the times in the past where we were developing a lot of analytical work to sort of augment the raw data that we were providing to help those clubs, do some analysis of player, performance and such. More and more often now, that's the clubs that we're interacting with are less interested in sort of some of those more advanced analytical work that we're doing because they're wanting to do that themselves. Like they're hiring very smart people, building out their groups and wanting to work with it internally. So that is partially to say it's I don't have a great answer for the ability of determining which like to the extent that this stuff has pervaded, but I would just sort of based on these little proxy elements, it feels like it's pretty pervasive throughout the industry at this point.
So what's interesting is, I kind of work with different professional teams around the world in different sports, right? So I'm a baseball guy, but when I started getting exposed to like non-public data in soccer and say hockey and NFL, I realized, wow, they have amazingly rich data sets, like extremely detailed, almost in some ways better than baseball. One of the reasons why I had Amod on the panel is that he's, fortunate enough to kind of work with different clubs around the world in different sports. So Amod, I was curious from your perspective, is baseball falling behind when it's coming to AI compared to other sports?
I definitely don't think so, because just by looking at where other sports are compared to baseball, I think baseball is still ahead, just in terms of the, as he mentioned about the size of the organization and the way teams are running their operations. They're almost like big tech in the sense that the way they operate, like they have 8 data scientists, 10 analysts, 4 software engineers building their internal applications. So I don't think that's the case, because compared to other sports, if you look at soccer, especially in Europe, where it's mostly like a single man department, like one person is responsible of doing the data analysis, the data science work, and also building like whatever dashboard applications on top of it to show to his performance analysts or coaches. So yeah, I definitely don't think that's the case. Especially, I think it's only going to grow better in terms of like new products coming in the market. Obviously, it would be an AI panel if we don't talk about LLMs sometime soon. But yeah, like teams are going to use those in the future.
So what's interesting is like what I'm getting a sense of is that professional teams actually, not necessarily in baseball, but in other sports, they almost have so much data that it's overwhelming. Like it's a paralysis. A lot of teams, top clubs in say Europe in soccer might only use, 13% of the data products that they actually pay for, right? There's just so much information out there. So how do you compare like the data usage for like MLB teams and like building their AI models and the integration of that data compared to other sports?
So I think you have to look at it from a historic perspective as well, right? I think baseball was one of the first that really started this revolution, so as to say, in terms of sports analytics, right? So you have your like data collection in baseball was done like quite previously, whereas compared to other sports where you have data coming in now, but not necessarily every club has that understanding of how they want to harness that information. Like you have your 30 hertz tracking data that's coming in through whatever data provider you are partnered to, but that's so much information, and like you have to store that at a place where it's scalable, and that has to be some sort of a cloud interface or something, which clubs just are not as capable in. Different sports, but I think baseball teams like have either on-prem setups or they have moving to cloud, like they're using advanced AWS, Azure softwares as well.
Yeah, what I was surprised is kind of how much the league, in baseball has kind of integrated this data for the teams, right? So, and for replay, right? So MLB and the teams have access to these really huge data sets that have been collected for the sole purpose of like analytics, right? I feel like in other sports, they've collected the data and they didn't even have an analytics use case yet or a team large enough to process it. So it's really great that baseball has kind of at the league level collaborated between the league and the teams to have this data be very useful and impactful and be able to be used immediately. So as I alluded to earlier, we're living in a post GPT world. I don't even know if we've necessarily talked about generative AI yet at this conference, but it's a little bit scary in the sense that it could be the future of what intelligence looks like, right? Generative AI is very different than the kind of techniques that we've been displaying at this conference in the past. There's even a, kind of an understanding that it could even be conscious. Like if you kind of look at what experts are saying, these OpenAI models, we can't disprove that it's already conscious, which is a little interesting as well. But we're getting a sense just from working with teams that they see generative AI as the new source of edge, right? There's only so many random forest models you can make. So I kind of want to talk about this with the panelists, which is, where do you see generative AI kind of potentially being applied at a club and even in MLB, say like communicating with umps or to fans or to broadcast?
So again, the LLMs, I think ChatGPT was one of the first that really opened the world's eyes in general. And I think sports teams started seeing that as well. Like maybe there's something that we can do to solve those problems that are unanswerable by these, random forests that you mentioned. So I think one of the way is like talking the player's language or talking the coach's language in a natural way. So for example, like you have a scout report, and you have like tons and tons of textual data on that. And, your average, like the terminology that a scout will use might not be understood by your regular chat GPT model. Like they may use something like, oh, this player has a arm built like a trunk of a tree or something. ChatGPT may not answer what that means exactly, but if you like what teams are starting to do now is like build their specific sports related LLM models just for the purpose of, answering these questions. So like I have these tons and tons of scout reports. Can the LLM simply synthesize it, summarize it for the GM and AGM to, make better decisions off of?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say honestly, because this brings me back, to the idea that, kind of what both of what Amod was alluding to, and I think Brian, when we were chatting last night, you had sort of a good suggestion for something that generative AI could be used for, which is again sort of, before I get there, prefacing this with, when analytics started becoming such a big part of baseball and of what we're going to be doing to both analyze player performance and to potentially help those on field, whether it's coaching staff or players, sort of understand the things that they could be doing better. Like, there was a point at which it became not good enough just to be a good analyst. Like you had to be able to convey this information in digestible ways that isn't overwhelmingly mathy or isn't overwhelmingly, analytical. And it became something that as an analyst, you had to sort of develop that other skill of being able to present it, to do it, in a digestive way. And we've heard, all these other sort of, elements throughout the conference so far of how much players and coaching staffs have become, it's great that they've gotten to become used to that data and want that data. But where I think relating this now back to this idea of what generative AI could help with, and again, I'm not going to take credit for this because I think this was Brian's idea, but that idea that you could sort of develop, whether it's a sort of the organization's philosophy and all sorts of elements that are related to, say, a specific player that would then, just kind of auto-generate a bullet point or 2 bullet points that are worth them thinking about for that day, and doing something, similar from day to day. And each player, based on whatever attributes you're going to feed it, like, is going to get their own sort of personalized information. And it's something that can be done because of how powerful this is, like very easily, very quickly, and repeatedly, without, having to put the, the intern on it to spend 3 hours a day, the way that maybe, I don't know how many people in here have experienced all the hours of work that can go into developing reports from an intern's perspective within a ball club. So yeah, that's one thought I have.
just to piggyback off that, one of the panels yesterday, Trevor May was brought up and how he struggled with having to deal with, intaking all that data in a short amount of time with the implementation of the pitch clock. And my mind immediately went to like, can this help prolong careers? Can this help affect day-to-day performance? Because the mental wear and tear of a long baseball season is simplified in a way that, you get to just play the game because the processing of all the information is just more efficient. So there's, I think, so many avenues, and there's I think a clear path that it could impact player performance, player evaluation, and ultimately, there's an economic side that can then be affected by how well they perform or how much that can drastically change player performance as well.
Yeah, it's interesting because what we're kind of seeing with working with analytics clubs at clubs is essentially there's a divide between the analytics and eventually the coaches and the players, right? So there's a certain cognitive load that people have. How much information could you actually use in a game, right? If analytics are so complex, it's actually the enemy of focus, right? So what a generative AI solution, and actually Carlos Pena gave a talk about this at Sloan a couple of days ago on behalf of AlphaPlay, but he was basically saying that what you could do is tailor the generative AI to the specific preferences of a player in the exact language, length, and number of bullet points that they want to know before a game, right? A player actually, Carlos was saying, wants to be prepared. They want to have information. They don't want to feel like they're going into an ambush. But at the same time, it can't be too much information. And that's the idea of cognitive load. So what generative AI does, and I think what's made it so magical with the public, is it's not statistical. There are no numbers. It is language. It's like a text, right? So as soon as ChatGPT came out, everybody could immediately understand the power of AI. While people in this room before could understand the power of AI because they're opening up code books and looking at the statistics, right? But ChatGPT kind of hides the statistical component. It just shows you an answer in text, right? So essentially what you could do is, and what we do for teams around the world, is create custom LLMs where it's the team's philosophy, the team's strategy, doesn't talk about things the team doesn't want to deploy in the exact kind of language that they want to see. So then it kind of bridges the divide between the analytics side and the player side. Because, people in this conference have really brilliant ideas, really good things. But if it's too complex for a player to understand, it'll never be used, right? So I think generative AI is essentially a voice in order for a human to understand the statistical nature of what an AI thinks. On that note, I was wondering with you guys, where do you see kind of what are your personal feelings about like the future of AI and baseball as a sport?
I mean, I'll start here just in terms of like, and using some of our experience at SIS as sort of a grounding for this. I mean, I think that, we're trying to use more analytical means of, things just have to get faster. I mean, our company was sort of developed on a, really outstanding idea of let's start collecting data, go deeper into games than anyone else is doing, and doing it via the method that makes sense at the time, which back 20 years ago was to just have people watching games and collecting the data as it went, you sort of annotating them. But like, as things progress, as technology gets better, as more technological sort of alternatives are collecting data in faster ways, there's ways in which that has to evolve. And so we're trying to incorporate more AI into what we're doing. But I think the key there is that, and obviously some of the fear I think that comes along with these technological solutions to things is, is the technology really always right? Does it always know what it's doing? And I think that's where, for us, sort of the future of that is kind of blending these two things together. So, an example, we're trying to use or have built out a computer vision model to, one project that we've just sort of completed is a computer vision model that allows us to sort of set the location or tag the location of where the catcher was setting his target on a given pitch. Trying to do that across all of like professional baseball, whether it's majors, minors, like if you had to do that via just people watching games, it's unwieldy. But using computer vision to do that obviously makes that process a lot easier, a lot faster. But there's still a certain level of confidence that model is going to have, and it's not going to get every pitch right. And blending that with anything that falls outside of a certain level of confidence with our traditional ways of looking at those types of pitches with our baseball experts and being able to make adjustments relative to that. I think that's, again, sort of the things that I think we're trying to do. And I think this even sort of dovetails a little bit even with kind of that idea of the robo umpire. Same thing, right? You want to let the technology improve things, but in those edge cases, in those instances where there might be a question, if you don't fully feel like you can trust the technology, get a human being that really knows what he's doing in there to sort of make those calls. And I think similarly to the way that when analytics first came into the game, if there was a little bit of headbutting between sort of the traditional way of doing things and the new way of doing things, it wasn't an either or. Like teams I think have realized that the best way to deal with all of that is just kind of incorporate these things together so that you get the power of all of it together.
Just quickly to, again, piggyback off that, we love baseball because there's a human element, human component that makes it a special game. So the thought of is there a place for AI? Where does it fit in during the live game, or is it more on the preparation side? It seems like no matter what, there will have to be some type of collaboration between the two sides to maximize the use case of AI in baseball.
Yeah, I think you touched a bit on it as well. And is analytics still being seen as an enemy for coaches? And I think for me personally is trying to bridge that gap. Obviously, AI in general is like a broad technology and it's quite complex to understand, but can you essentially use AI to understand AI? That's like the sort of interesting conversations that can be had. And how can we bridge this gap between your builders and your consumers? I think that's like one area of aspect where I think we could still evolve and develop in the sport as well.
Yeah, what's fascinating is that if there's hundreds of different models being used by clubs, it could be too difficult to kind of communicate, organize it, even prioritize. But if you can kind of layer on that speaking element on top, the generative AI, it kind of becomes a seamless interaction, and it's a non-statistical interaction. So it's almost like the future of analytics is no numbers, right, to the end user. What's a cool thing too, that like some folks at the NFL that I know that kind of organize their data, it's a company called Infinite Athlete for broadcast purposes. They're already using generative AI to custom make the announcer's voice to be any celebrity you want, right? So they have a Samuel L. Jackson doing NFL games, right? Obviously, there's licensing issues with using people's voices, but I think you only need like a 1 minute recording of that person's voice for a generative AI system to essentially duplicate it, right? So if you think about kind of, baseball, it does have a demographic problem when it comes to the fans, right? Compared to other sports. Using AI technologies to engage with fans on that kind of level could be very, very helpful. I don't know, how many of you use the NBA app? So in the NBA app, of those people who know it, whenever there's a dunk in the middle of the game by a player you're following, it'll push to your phone, hey, that player just dunked, watch the video. This is a very, very clever way to engage with fans that are younger that don't want to watch something that lasts more than an hour or lasts more than 15 minutes, actually. So I think AI could be a savior for baseball when it comes to engaging new fans, having customized content, giving them an interaction with the game, even live, right? That's a little bit more the couple seconds that they're used to watching on TikTok. And it could actually end up helping the sport from a revenue generation perspective. On that note, I wanted to kind of open up to questions.
Really nice panel. So kind of in terms, this is a more of a general question, like for all sports, but I know like some sports, you know, they have different level of how analytics have been applied. For example, like baseball, it's more of a discrete like game where it's like discrete pitches compared to like hockey and soccer where it's more of a continuous game. So how can AI make it more of a uniform playing field across all sports in terms of how analytics can be applied?
I mean, I can give, I suppose, one sort of brief example. Again, sort of tying this into just some personal experience with what our company's doing. I mean, we have, we're applying AI models to being able to track a lot of the new basketball, like both player and ball tracking, you know, data streams that are there, and then like using that to tag the actual like events. You know, was this a screen? What kinds of action came off that screen, shots, et cetera. I mean, being able to apply that kind of stuff to baseball, while it's, you know, while basketball may be a different sport in terms of like the interaction, like you still within baseball, you're still going to have players running around the bases, things happening at a base, you know, when a throw comes in, et cetera. So that, yeah, I mean, it would be that kind of thing, potentially like being able to tag events using AI, rather than, you know, somebody like a human being actually describing what happened on the play, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think to just add to Joe, I think what we can also do is like the nature of the game is obviously different, right? Like you have your baseball where it is a statistical game, you are calculating runs. I think it's slightly easier in sense of modeling that. But in soccer, I think what a lot like your free flowing games, essentially, like what of the most recent advancements that are being done is evaluating each action, which is what he's referring to about tagging events. So essentially, like a pass that a player makes, was that an effective pass? And there are several models around that, like your expected threats, your WAPs, and your EPVs. So I think it's more about, you know, valuing particular action that a player makes, I guess, in a free flowing game.
I think it's interesting that, you know, AI is such a, well, just curious, how many people of you in the audience think that like a GPT or generative AI would be helpful for you on the job? If you could just raise your hand. So it's almost like 100%. I think the Wall Street Journal had a poll recently where it was only 33% of people thought that, 33% didn't think it was going to help, and 33% weren't sure, right? So you're all baseball fans, you all work with data. You can see that there will be massive productivity gains using the system, right? So all of a sudden, why is somebody writing scouting reports on every person in the league when that can be done in a couple seconds by an AI system that's trained on the team's data, like a custom AI system that each team would have? So essentially the future of sports will be every single team has its own LLM. Why does it have its own LLM? Because the LLM that's called GPT is trained on the internet. The internet is full of fact and fiction. That's why the responses aren't correct. But if you train an LLM only on proprietary team data, it will give you really, really good, stable answers. And it'll give you the answers that the team wants to hear. The team can customize it completely. So I don't know how many of you know this, but like essentially Elon Musk was saying, I want to make my own LLM system because, you know, OpenAI's self-censors, it's too political. Google's Gemini has been in the news for, you know, creating a little bit crazy responses, almost like a censored type response where a corporation decides what it'll say or not. So Musk said, I want it to be able to answer any question, whether it be liberal or conservative. So the future of LLMs actually for the public will be kind of like you go into Netflix now or watch a different channel. You can choose an LLM that you trust on a subject you like to give you the answers you want, right? Because there will never be an LLM that will give an answer that satisfies everyone. It's always going to be customized. So teams are also going to customize their LLMs. So in that sense, it's going to be very exciting because a very small club could end up having as much resources as, you know, somebody who had 100 scouts out there looking at this video when you know, these systems can kind of review these videos, flag tips for review, who the top players in leagues are instantly overnight based on the latest games. And it's almost like a very big leveling effect I see.
All right, so this is a question mostly for Joe and the DRS, but I'd be interested in the rest of the panel's thoughts on this if they have experience with other metrics as well. So I'm curious, as you were building out the DRS, which players, maybe even especially famous players, did the model confirm as being especially great? Which ones were terrible defenders that the model said were actually good defenders, and then vice versa? And then how did you deal with that in post? And so what it's kind of getting at is, to what degree did you value the eye test and what people were saying like year over year about certain players with respect to how that contrasted with the models?
Sure. So, I mean, not sure if this is necessarily is where you're going with the question. I mean, it sounds to some degree like, with DRS, is it just, are you asking effectively like when you've got an analytical model versus just the eye test, how, like, who did DRS say looked good is
Would
good?
an example be helpful?
Yeah, well, I mean, because I can give you an example. It's just where I was going to go with this is I mean, I talked about how we sort of evolved DRS to start, using machine learning models. Now, off the top of my head, I don't remember where like the previous version of DRS, maybe there was any real change in terms of like who DRS thought was a good player, once we sort of introduced the machine learning aspect of it. I think that there were the differences that we were able to achieve by using machine learning versus our previous sort of like bucketing model, where like, we'd have to group the distance the ball was hit into like, say, groupings of 10-foot intervals, or like, spray angles into groupings of, again, whatever it was, five vector intervals. And when you're bucketing things like that, the issue that you end up with is like, there may be certain buckets with small sample sizes, right? And those balls in play may end up giving inordinate amounts of credit or penalty to players just because there's not a lot of information in there if they make that play or don't make that play. Where machine learning is able to sort of not have to rely on those discrete buckets and can kind of like, things are smoother and we're going to get more reliable analyses of those balls in play. And therefore like the runs that we're attributing to those players. I mean, just sort of straight like DRS versus the eye test. Back in the day, I remember one example of Brandon Phillips being somebody that everybody sort of loved because of how flashy some of his plays that were being made were, but somebody that also that the metrics didn't love quite as much because it may have been that he was sort of diving for a ball that a lot of other players could have just sort of fielded more normally. But that is less to do with the machine learning aspect of things and just kind of like an example of a player that the objective metrics liked less than some of the eye test stuff did. I hope that answers the question.
Do you mind if I clarify for him? So when DWAR came out, it showed that Ozzie Smith was crazy good. And that tracked for all of us because that's what our experience of Ozzie Smith was. And so it wasn't surprising that he was like far and away the best player ever. So that's kind of where I was going. Did you have a situation like that where the model maybe said like, this player is not actually that good, and then you thought, well, okay, so the model must be, it must be an error. We need to adjust the model because there's no way that Ozzie Smith isn't as good as we all think he is?
I don't have a great example off the top of my head. I mean, the one pseudo example I can give of something like that, and again, this goes back a little bit of a ways, but the Brett Laurie issue, which, I'm sure Mark and Ben over there are going to chuckle at. One where it was like the model was the model, but as teams started to shift more and more, like you'd end up with Brett Laurie playing shallow right field, fielding a ground ball as a third baseman that like no other third baseman is fielding, and therefore getting an insane amount of credit. And all of a sudden it looks like Brett Laurie is the best third baseman in baseball by a million miles. And it's not actually that, because he's actually making plays that anybody could make because the ball's being hit right at him. So it's that kind of stuff where, yes, we saw those kinds of issues and realized that the model had to be dealt with because it's, he's not that much better than everybody else, right?
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Sure.
Hey, I wanted to ask about computer vision and biomechanics. I know a lot of teams now have like hitting and pitching labs with force plates and marker-based motion tracking systems. But with Hawkeye and high-speed cameras now in the stadiums, what opportunities do you see for markerless motion tracking? What are teams doing now with computer vision for that? And what sort of opportunities do you see in the future?
So I think in terms of computer vision itself, like I'm not exactly sure how that's going to relate to biomechanics. Like, is that your question?
Yeah, so an athlete's going to perform differently in a lab environment than it will on the field during a game. So like we can measure now like joints and kinematics of a pitcher or a hitter with computer vision models, right? So what do you see in that space? That's my question.
So I guess there are already ways where you can calculate that, but I guess how computer vision can aid you is, I guess, if you're looking at a way a pitcher throws and how many amount of pitches he's going to throw, the way he throws the ball, and if that somehow impacts his, like his injury records or something like that. I guess again, I'll go to the example of soccer where you have like tracking data, and you can calculate the amount of sprints that a player made in that particular game. So I guess that's how we can somehow relate to biomechanics using computer vision.
Thank you.
So I just wanted to, there's a question. Okay.
Finding the place where there isn't, strange information, or you want to get good information, but don't you have to have within your own proprietary system that information already generated, by Scout, by your interns, by whoever is making them up? So isn't that where most of the work is? If you're going to say, I want to know who are my best fielders in my system, don't you have to do most of that work already? Or how is it adding to that, to where you want to know who are the best, say the best fielders or my best base runners in my system?
Yeah, so I think that's what's great about the process, which is there's a lot of really good work teams are doing now, but it's not necessarily that they're skilled communicators as to the work they're doing, right? Or generating customized impacts for specific matches against specific opponents. It might be like more general models. But essentially what it is you can think about it as like, are we able to actually break this down to a bite-sized amount that without having too much information that a coach would actually use in the upcoming game, right? So that's a skill in itself, right? So we were talking about how with this new generative AI system, there's almost like a pressure for teams to hire product engineers to like deploy this system because they see that it's very valuable for automatically communicating things. And when you can automatically communicate things, you get it to the players and the coaches days ahead of time. So sure, a human could do it, but this really, really speeds it up and makes it more productive. And like you said, like it's not necessarily replacing anybody's job. It's just actually helping them get more credit for the work they were already doing and getting the information quicker to the people who need it.
I want to ask a stupid question, right? Because I don't understand it. How is this being generated? Like, I don't even understand the general, and everything I've seen so far, and like what makes the news are the things that lack awareness. It's kind of this blank, strange sort of computer generated nonsense. So what is actually happening?
Yeah.
When this is being read? Explain this.
Yeah, this is a really great question, which is essentially the way that there's randomness to like the GPT used today, the public uses, is because they actually have a setting on it called temperature. The temperature creates the randomness. So every response, there's a statistical distribution where the GPT thinks in its models, what should the response be? And it's randomly sampling on that distribution, which is why you never get the same answer when you ask it like on 2 different days. So essentially what sports teams do is say, look, I don't want to do that. You know, like I don't need to go through all this information. I might have already built this model with this information. I just want to create custom reports by player instantly before each match, looking at the opposing lineups in a couple seconds, when it could take hundreds of hours of manpower to actually do that. So it's almost like kind of gathering together the information, that non-public information they have across all their different systems, and kind of serving it, whether it be, you know, the manager, the player, you know, the GM, they could each get the content that they want. And each one would have a different voice, right? So the team would kind of work with, like, how do we want to explain this concept? Like, what's the best way? And then you teach the LLM, like in this specific context, if we're speaking to the general manager, say it this way. If you're speaking to a Dominican baseball player, let's have it in Spanish and a certain baseball lingo that they're used to, right? So the same content can kind of be longer, less, and truly customized by that team to kind of reflect the values and the way that the organization wants to kind of communicate that information. So it's like totally private and it's not accessible to anybody else, and only the team is using the system to kind of generate that information.
Okay, if you were making, if you tried to make better decision making, would AI do more than just your own decision making, say red flag system that you would put together? Like, would it go beyond what you're thinking?
Yeah, I mean, like what we do for teams is we do like an impacts-based analysis where you can kind of quantify different pieces of the game and see like the percentage impact certain players and their skills and strengths and weaknesses or strategies have on your win probability. So if you can quantify everything across win probability, then you're able to then say this might be more impactful information to tell a player versus something else. So that's how you kind of prioritize. If a player only wants to have one bullet point, otherwise they're going to be overwhelmed about a pitcher, that's the highest priority thing that you'd give them. And then you can kind of go by priority of the number of bullet points they want to see when it comes to actually kind of impacting the win percentage of the game.
But I'm saying even bigger. If you're club executive, general manager, president of baseball ops, could you make it, would it eventually get to the point where it's telling you what the decisions could be according to your own beliefs, or would it get better than what you are just pumping into it?
Yeah, I think, to be honest, I don't think many teams want to hear things that are outside of the things they want to hear. So we actually, we kind of, we kind of censor the LLM because they're like, oh no, that's a really sensitive subject. This player, we know they're really terrible and we overpay for them. Like, let's just never mention this again in our reports, right? Or so it's like, it's really, that's why I kind of alluded to, like, LLMs are going to give you the answer you want to hear. And I think we were talking last night about how there's certain things that, you know, you would never tell a player, even if it is the true analytical truth. Right? Like, you wouldn't necessarily want to tell them the truth because there could be an impact on, you know, just the human dynamic of that player, you know, working with the team, right? So there is a censorship to analytics today. So you're not just giving the unvarnished truth of like that player because they're part of your club, and they could do worse if you hurt their ego, let's call it.
Brian, are you essentially asking though if like could AI just be the general manager of a team?
Yeah, but be a better version of that. No, even if it's like it's you, like, can you be a smarter version of me? You know what I mean?
Right. And I think where Brian's going with that though is just that idea that like, you know, if you trained the model in a certain way to make certain decisions and value certain things, and therefore like, would it be able to make a decision of like recommending which players should be traded for, which players should be signed, acquired, whatever. You know, that to some degree, I don't know, and to some, I would defer a little bit more to Brian on this one, just because he's more expert in it than I am. But you know, there's a certain point at which, you know, within any team, like your decision making is going to have to evolve, and like therefore, that's where you're tuning these models and training these models to evolve with you. And therefore, like, you wouldn't like that if that model, therefore, if it effectively is getting too stuck in its ways, eventually it's going to be unsuccessful. So like, I think that's where you still would need a human general manager and having the model, you know, help that individual, as opposed to just having the AI model be the general manager.
You know, and I think just because I just watched 2001 Space Odyssey, would it then turn on you?
Yeah, we were talking about like our robot's going to be on the field, right? Doing this, right? So I think in a way you can they can kind of turn on you today in the sense that if you don't rein it in, if you don't set that setting where it's like don't be creative, like you essentially have to tell it don't be creative in order for it to be stable in its responses, right? So if you end up letting it be creative, who knows what could happen? And I think that's one of the reasons why Sam Altman ended up being temporarily kicked out of OpenAI, because their board members actually did think that we don't really understand enough about this technology with 100% confidence to think that we're deploying it safely, right? So currently it's not going to turn on us, but I think, there's always a possibility, just like with nuclear weapons or any new technology, that something does go bad.
Thank you. And if you say you can have sportscasters speak in any voice, can you get them to say something intelligent though?
Well,
Thank you.
I mean,
Thank you.
I was joking with him last night. I think we need like a Kenny GPT. That would be awesome.
Yeah, exactly.
Like you get the great answers. I think a lot of fans might want to prefer to have his voice and his intelligence actually commenting on every game that they're watching. So yeah, I like that.
Smattering of applause. Thank you. Can I ask a DRS question? Did you find this year, I found more discrepancies, I'll give up the football, I promise, between OAA and DRS, outs above average, StatCast, DRS. I just found many that there were wide discrepancies between like high-level players, more so than I've seen in the past few years.
I mean, well, so the first thing I'll qualify any answer related to that is just with like OAA. OAA is a specific aspect of defense, and that it's evaluating how well a player turns balls and plays into outs, whereas DRS is considering many more components of defense. One example of that is so there, like, let's say within DRS, there's a component for turning balls and play into outs. That's in various iterations has been called plus minus run saved, or now is called sort of part run saved based on our part methodology. Anyway, but there's like a good plays, misplays, run saved component as well, which is something it actually stems from something Bill James came up with originally, this idea of certain plays that don't otherwise show up in the box score, but have an impact. So like a defensive misplay would be like the example I think that I love to use is let's say there's a runner on second, base hit to the outfield. Right, the outfielder comes up throwing to home because that runner's trying to score, overthrows the cutoff man. Runner's safe at home, never really had a shot at getting him out. The hitter is able to advance to second behind that play. Like that's something that doesn't show up in the box score. It's not an error, but that right fielder, by overthrowing the cutoff man, has done a disservice to his team. And those are the kinds of things that we're also incorporating into our DRS methodology. There's 50 some types of misplays, 30 some types of good plays, which is sort of the converse concept. And we're evaluating throwing arms. With catchers, there's pitch framing and stolen base run saved, and same with pitchers. So anyway, that is to say, so OAA, let's focus on just like the seven outfield, players in the outfield, out in the field. That's where there can be a discrepancy in terms of like somebody that may look positively by OAA and less so by DRS. It may just be because there are these other components of the game that are sort of dragging them down. In terms of whether there's more of those that happened in 2023 versus previous years, I guess I don't have a great answer for if there may have been a good explanation for that in particular. But in terms of DRS versus OAA, you'd kind of have to first sort of focus DRS in terms of a direct comparison on that one component that is the direct analog, that part run save kind of thing.
So you're thinking your defensive metrics more complete.
Then OAA, yes. And now I think obviously Major League Baseball is starting to expand like the various aspects of defense. It's evaluating beyond just OAA, but yes, if you're talking about just OAA, I think DRS is more complete. Yeah.
So then be more.
Yes. All right.
This is back the other way. I'm getting a lot of pushback.
Yeah.
It's not
So-
that I'm asking you.
so
the
I-
other guys too.
I think we're out of time right now. I'm getting the signal. I mean, this is a very interesting conversation, but we'll be outside. If you have any questions right after this panel, we can continue the conversation. I also wanted to make an announcement that SABR has an AI and machine learning committee. If you're not a member of SABR or you already are, please join that committee. There's a mailing list on the SABR website. We're building a custom LLM only using SABR information, right? So every biography, retro sheet, everything. It will be the greatest baseball LLM in the world with the help of SABR members. So please come and talk to me after the talk if you're interested. Thank you.